He told me I was his future, the one he was leaving his fragile wife for. He'd whisper it against my skin in the penthouse overlooking Central Park. The city lights a glittering promise of the life we'd build. He said she was a ghost in their marriage, a placeholder until I came along. But then the door to our love nest swung open, and there she was, his pregnant, fragile wife. And in her hands, she held not divorce papers, but the inheritance documents that turned his multi-billion-dollar empire to dust, and his promises to me into lies. The city of New York always glittered, but from the 82nd floor penthouse of the 157 skyscraper, it was a galaxy laid at your feet. This was Adrian Sterling's world, a universe he commanded with the same ruthless precision he used to build his real estate empire. Tonight, however, the master of the universe was a humble supplicant, his lips tracing a reverent path along the porcelain skin of Chloe Duval. "You," he murmured, his voice a low thrum against her neck, "are the only real thing in my life." Chloe arched into him, a languid, feline stretch. Her fingers tipped with immaculate crimson, tangled in his dark, expertly styled hair. "And what about Amelia?" She purred the name, a deliberate, silken dart. Adrian's breath hitched for a fraction of a second. "Amelia is an obligation, a memory, a ghost in a house that was never a home." He lifted his head, his impossibly blue eyes locking with hers. They were the color of a summer sky, a sky that promised endless warmth, a sky that Chloe had convinced herself was hers alone to bask in. "You are my future, Chloe, the mother of my children, the real Mrs. Sterling." The words were a potent cocktail of everything she'd ever craved: security status, and above all, victory. Chloe, a former gallery assistant, who had learned early that her beauty was a currency, had invested 5 years of her life in Adrian. 5 years of stolen weekends, clandestine dinners, and the gnawing, ever-present reality of being the other woman. But she wasn't just any mistress. She was an investment banker's daughter who had seen her family lose everything. She knew the value of a sure thing, and Adrian Sterling, with his chiseled jaw and a net worth that flirted with the GDP of a small nation, was the surest thing in Manhattan. "Prove it," she challenged, her voice a seductive whisper. "The Amelia problem. When does it go away?" Adrian sighed, a theatrical sound of a man burdened by the weight of his own honor. "Soon, my love. Very soon. Her pregnancy, it complicates things. She's so fragile, so delicate. The doctor says any stress could be detrimental, fragile, delicate." The words painted a picture of a wilting flower, a porcelain doll that might shatter at the slightest touch. This was the image Adrian had carefully cultivated of his wife Amelia Sterling. And Chloe had bought it wholesale. She pictured a mousy, unassuming woman, probably swathed in beige cashmere. Her days a monotonous cycle of charity luncheons and waiting for a husband who was never coming home. A woman utterly oblivious to the vibrant, passionate world Adrian shared with her. A few miles downtown, in a sprawling pre-war apartment on Park Avenue, the supposedly fragile Amelia Sterling was not wilting. She was in fact methodically reviewing a stack of legal documents with a focus that would have made a seasoned litigator proud. Her baby bump, a prominent, perfect sphere under a simple silk blouse, was the only soft curve in a room filled with the sharp angles of law books and financial reports. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her private investigator, a terse man named Mr. Jones. "He's at the penthouse. She's with him," as predicted. Amelia's fingers steady and unadorned, save for a simple platinum wedding band typed a reply. "Thank you, Jones. Continue surveillance. I need the timeline airtight." She stood and walked over to the grand window, looking out at the same city skyline that Chloe was currently claiming as her own. But Amelia saw something different. She didn't see a glittering promise. She saw a battlefield, and she had been preparing for this war for a very long time. Amelia wasn't a fool. She had known about Chloe for 3 of the 5 years Chloe had been with Adrian. The signs were there for anyone willing to look: the late-night meetings, the scent of a strange, expensive perfume clinging to his suits. Chloe favored the heady notes of Baccarat Rouge 540. A scent Amelia now associated with betrayal. The sudden, almost frantic generosity that always followed a particularly long business trip. At first, the pain had been a physical thing, a crushing weight in her chest that made it hard to breathe. She had loved Adrian, or at least the man she thought he was, the charming, brilliant architect of his own destiny, who had swept her off her feet at a Sotheby's auction. He had pursued her with a single-minded intensity, making her feel like the most cherished woman in the world. He had married her in a lavish ceremony at the St. Regis, a society event that had been the talk of the town. The illusion had shattered slowly, then all at once. The discovery wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet click of a laptop, an email left open. "My darling, see, I live for the moments we steal. A." Her first instinct was to scream, to throw priceless vases, to pack a bag and leave. But then she remembered her grandfather's words. Elias Vance was not a man given to emotional outbursts. He was a shrewd old-money patriarch who had built his own fortune in shipping before it was fashionable. On her wedding day, he had taken her aside, his grip on her arm surprisingly firm. "Listen to me, little bird," he had said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "That man you're marrying, he's a shark. He sees you, our name, our history, as another acquisition. Enjoy the ride, but never, ever let him see the cards you're holding. And always have an exit strategy." At the time, she had dismissed it as the cynicism of an old man. Now his words were a lifeline. So she didn't scream. She didn't cry, not where anyone could see. She swallowed her pain and began to plan. She played the part of the perfect, trusting wife, the fragile Amelia, with an Oscar-worthy performance. She redecorated their home, hosted his insufferable business partners, and smiled serenely at charity galas, all while her mind was a whirlwind of calculations. Her pregnancy was not, as Adrian believed, a complication. It was a catalyst. It was the final piece of her strategy falling into place. It was the move that would checkmate the king. The inheritance papers spread across her desk were not from Adrian's side of the family. The Sterling fortune, vast as it was new money built on leveraged debt and aggressive takeovers. It was a house of cards propped up by Adrian's reputation. The papers in front of Amelia were different. They were from her grandfather, Elias Vance, and they were ironclad. Elias had passed away 6 months prior, leaving Amelia not just his immense, diversified and debt-free fortune, but also his controlling shares in Vance Global, a logistics and shipping conglomerate with assets that dwarfed Adrian's real estate holdings. The catch, the beautiful, intricate, and utterly brilliant catch, was in the fine print of the will clause Amelia herself had helped her grandfather's lawyers draft years ago. The clause stipulated that full control of the Vance inheritance and the majority shares in the company would transfer to Amelia upon one of 2 conditions: the birth of her first legitimate heir, or conclusive proof of spousal infidelity. Amelia's hand rested protectively on her belly. Her heir was coming. And thanks to Mr. Jones, the proof of infidelity was not just conclusive. It was a mountain of evidence complete with photographs, hotel receipts, and sworn affidavits. She had been waiting for the right moment, the moment of maximum impact. Adrian had been growing bolder, more careless, convinced of his wife's fragility and ignorance. He had started talking about restructuring his company, hinting at the need for a massive infusion of capital. He had even laughably suggested they use some of her family money as collateral for a new risky venture in Dubai. He was preparing to ask for a divorce, planning to offer her a paltry settlement, while he and Chloe rode off into the sunset on the back of her grandfather's legacy. He saw her as a bridge to a greater fortune. He had no idea she was about to burn that bridge to the ground. And Chloe, the ambitious, beautiful Chloe, was the perfect pawn in this high-stakes game. Her confidence, her belief in Adrian's promises, was the very thing that would make his downfall so exquisitely complete. Amelia almost pitied her. Almost. But pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. This wasn't just about a cheating husband. This was about survival. It was about protecting her child, her legacy, and honoring the grandfather who had taught her that the most dangerous sharks are the ones that swim in tailored suits. She picked up the final document. It was a notarized copy of Elias Vance's will. Tucked neatly behind it was a one-page summary drafted by her lawyer outlining the immediate and irreversible transfer of assets. And on top of that, she placed a small, glossy photograph. It was taken by Mr. Jones just an hour ago. Adrian and Chloe locked in a passionate embrace on the balcony of the 157 penthouse, the lights of New York twinkling obliviously around them. She slipped the papers into a sleek leather portfolio. She checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, were solemn. There was no trace of the fragile woman Adrian described. In her place stood a queen ready to reclaim her kingdom. "Time to go," she said softly to her reflection, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. The future, after all, waits for no one. The air in the 157 penthouse was thick with the scent of impending triumph. Chloe, wrapped in a silk robe that matched the silvery sheen of her hair, swirled a glass of vintage Dom Perignon, the bubbles a fizzing reflection of her own effervescent mood. Adrian was on the phone in the adjoining study, his voice a low, confident murmur. He was closing a deal he'd said the final piece of the puzzle. "It's done," he announced, striding back into the living room, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. He loosened his tie, the knot of a man unbound by convention or consequence. "The funding for the Dubai project is secured. We're going to build a new wonder of the world, you and I." He pulled her into his arms, his kiss deep and proprietary. "Everything is falling into place. I spoke with my lawyer today. We're drafting the divorce papers. A generous settlement for Amelia, of course. Something to keep her comfortable." Comfortable. Chloe's voice was laced with a playful scorn. "Darling, the woman wears beige. Her idea of comfortable is probably a lifetime subscription to a book club." Adrian laughed, a rich, booming sound that filled the cavernous room. "Exactly. She won't fight it. She doesn't have it in her. She'll sign the papers, take her settlement, and fade away. And then my love?" He tilted her chin up, his gaze intense. "The world is ours. A real wedding, a family. The Sterling name will mean more than ever before." This was the moment Chloe had been waiting for, the culmination of years of calculated patience. She felt a thrill course through her, a potent mix of adrenaline and vindication. She was no longer the secret, the footnote. She was the headline. She thought of the women she'd grown up with, the ones who had married for sensible, boring stability. They would all be reading about her Chloe Duval, the woman who had captured the king. What about the inheritance? Chloe asked the question, a final, necessary piece of due diligence. Amelia's family, they're not exactly paupers. Adrian waved a dismissive hand. Old money. Slow money. It's tied up in trusts and ancient portfolios. She can't touch the principal without a board of trustees who still think the telegraph is a revolutionary piece of technology. What I'm offering her will be more liquid cash than she's ever seen. She'll be happy. Trust me. He was so confident, so utterly convinced of his own narrative. It was this absolute self-assurance that had drawn Chloe to him in the first place. He didn't just enter a room. He conquered it. He saw the world not as it was, but as he willed it to be. And in his world, Amelia was a footnote, a ghost. A sharp, authoritative buzz from the penthouse's private elevator cut through their conversation. Adrian frowned. I'm not expecting anyone. He glanced at his Rolex. The staff left an hour ago. Chloe felt a flicker of unease. They were 82 floors up, cocooned in a fortress of wealth and privacy. Uninvited guests were not part of the architecture. Adrian strode to the foyer, his annoyance palpable. "Who is it?" he barked into the intercom. A voice calm and clear replied through the speaker. A voice that was both familiar and chillingly out of place. "It's your wife, Adrian. Let me in." The blood drained from Adrian's face. He shot a panicked look at Chloe, his composure shattering like a dropped champagne flute. Amelia, what the hell is she doing here? Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. Amelia. The ghost. The fragile, wilting flower. Here. Now. It was impossible. It was a nightmare. She scrambled to pull her robe tighter, suddenly feeling exposed, cheapened. The penthouse, which moments before had felt like her kingdom, now felt like a sup. "Get in the bedroom," Adrian hissed, his voice a panicked whisper. "Now go." But it was too late. Before Chloe could move, the elevator doors slid open with a soft, final ding. Amelia Sterling stepped into the foyer. She was not what Chloe had pictured. There was no beige cashmere, no mousy demeanor. Amelia was wearing a tailored navy blue maternity dress that hugged her bump, a picture of elegant power. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, accentuating the clean, aristocratic lines of her face. Her expression was one of serene, unassailable calm. She looked not at Chloe, but directly at her husband, her gaze level and unnervingly direct. And in her hands, she held a slim black leather portfolio. Amelia. Adrian stammered, his voice a strangled mess. He ran a hand through his hair, his earlier swagger completely gone. What are you doing here? You should be resting," the doctor said. "The doctor said I should avoid stress." Amelia finished for him, her voice cool and even. "And I've found there is nothing more stressful than living a lie. So I've come to end it." Her eyes for the first time flickered towards Chloe. It was not a look of anger or jealousy. It was something far more unnerving, a look of clinical assessment, as if she were examining a specimen under a microscope. "Chloe Duval, I presume?" Amelia said, her tone polite, almost conversational. "Baccarat Rouge, 540. A bold choice. My husband has terrible taste in perfume. And it seems in women." Chloe felt a hot flush of shame and anger. She opened her mouth to say something, to defend herself, to lash out, but the words wouldn't come. She was utterly disarmed by the woman standing before her. This was no ghost. This was a reckoning. Adrian finally found his voice, a blustering, desperate attempt to regain control. Amelia, this is not the time or the place. You're not well. Let me take you home. We can talk about this, whatever this is, tomorrow. He reached for her arm, but Amelia took a deliberate step back, her movement fluid and certain. Don't touch me, she said, the words as sharp and cold as ice. We have nothing to talk about. Everything that needs to be said is right here. She walked past him into the center of the magnificent living room, the city lights framing her silhouette. She placed the leather portfolio on the marble coffee table with a soft, definitive thud. You were telling Ms. Duval about your future, I believe Amelia said, her eyes boring into Adrian's, your new wonder of the world in Dubai. The Sterling name meaning more than ever before. It all sounded very ambitious. Adrian was pale, his bravado crumbling into dust. Amelia, please. You told me you needed capital. She continued, her voice relentless. You suggested we leverage some of my family money. You assumed my grandfather's fortune was a locked box, and that you, with your superior intellect, would be the one to pick the lock. She paused, letting the silence stretch thick with tension. Chloe stood frozen by the bar, a silent, unwilling spectator to the detonation of her own dreams. You see, Adrian, Amelia said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You made two fatal miscalculations. The first was underestimating my grandfather, and the second was underestimating me. She opened the portfolio. This, she said, sliding the top document across the polished marble, is a copy of my grandfather Elias Vance's last will and testament. Adrian stared at it, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Amelia continued, her voice a precise surgical instrument. As you know, he left me his entire estate, including his 60% controlling interest in Vance Global, a company, I might add, that is currently valued at approximately $22 billion. A bit more than old slow money, wouldn't you say? She let that sink in before delivering the killing blow. There was, however, a clause, a rather specific one. It states that my full unconditional control of all assets, including the immediate liquidation of certain trusts and the full voting power of the shares, is triggered by one of two events. She looked down at her stomach, her hand gently cradling her baby bump. The first is the birth of my first legitimate heir, which, as you can see, is imminent. Then her eyes cold and hard as diamonds snapped back to Adrian. She slid the glossy photograph across the table. It landed face up, a perfect, damning image of Adrian and Chloe's passionate kiss on that very balcony. The second trigger. Amelia said, her voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel, is conclusive proof of spousal infidelity, which, thanks to your carelessness and the excellent work of my investigator, I now have in abundance. She tapped a manicured finger on the document. As of 6:45 p.m. this evening, when my lawyer filed this notarized evidence with the probate court, the Elias Vance spousal clause was officially activated. All assets, all shares, all control transferred to me, unconditionally, irrevocably. Adrian's face was ashen. He looked from the photograph to the will, his mind struggling to process the scale of the catastrophe. What does this mean? Amelia gave a small, humorless smile. It means, Adrian, that the bridge capital you were sourcing for your Dubai project, the loan you secured from a consortium that, unbeknownst to you, is heavily backed by Vance Global, has been pulled. It means the collateral you put up, namely a significant portion of Sterling Holdings, is now forfeit. It means that your company, which is leveraged to the hilt, will be insolvent by morning. She turned her gaze to Chloe, whose champagne glass had slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the floor. And it means Amelia said, her voice devoid of any emotion, that the future he promised you does not exist. He told you that you were his future, but he was trying to build it with my inheritance, and he no longer has a single penny of it. She looked back at the man she had once loved, the man who had called her fragile. He looked broken, a hollowed-out shell of the titan he had been just minutes before. "You are not the king, Adrian," she said softly. "You were just a jester in my court, and your reign is over." With that, she turned her back straight, her head held high, and walked towards the elevator, leaving the ruins of 2 lives and a multi-billion-dollar empire in her wake. The elevator doors slid shut, and she was gone. The silence that descended upon the penthouse was heavier than any sound. It was the silence of a tomb, the suffocating quiet that follows a cataclysm. The city lights still twinkled outside, a mocking, indifferent audience to the carnage within. The shattered champagne glass on the floor was a perfect metaphor for the evening for their lives. Adrian Sterling, the man who bent skylines to his will, stood frozen in the center of the room. His face was a mask of disbelief, the color of wet concrete. He stared at the documents on the table, the will, the photograph, as if they were venomous snakes. He reached out a trembling hand, then snatched it back as if the paper itself might burn him. "No," he whispered. The word was a dry, rasping sound, a single crack in the monolithic silence. "No, it's not possible." Chloe, who had been paralyzed by the bar, finally found the ability to move. Her own dreams, so vibrant and close just moments ago, had evaporated into a bitter smoke. The penthouse now felt like a gilded cage, and the door had just slammed shut. "Adrian," she said, her voice tentative, thin. "Adrian." What did she mean? Insolvent forfeit? It's a bluff, right? It's a threat. She's just an angry, scorned wife. Adrian didn't seem to hear her. He was pacing now, a caged animal, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He tugged at his tie, which now felt like a noose. He ran his hands through his hair, dislodging the perfect, expensive styling. "Vance Global," he muttered, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying comprehension. The consortium. The lead investor was a shell corp based in the Cayman Islands. A subsidiary. Oh, God. He stopped pacing and stared at Chloe, but his eyes looked right through her. She knew. She knew all along. The Dubai deal. She didn't just pull the funding. She was the funding. She lured me in. She set the trap. The intricate, diabolical brilliance of it hit him like a physical blow. Amelia, his quiet, fragile Amelia, had orchestrated his downfall with the precision of a grandmaster playing chess. She had used his own ambition, his own arrogance, his own infidelity as the weapons of his destruction. He thought he was playing her, but he had been her pawn from the very beginning. Chloe's own mind was reeling. She wasn't a fool. She understood the language of finance and power. Insolvent wasn't a threat. It was a death sentence. The future Adrian had promised her, the society wedding, the status, the security, was built on the foundation of his empire. And that foundation had just been reduced to rubble. "So what does this mean?" she demanded, her voice rising, a note of hysteria creeping in. "What happens now, Adrian, talk to me. It means it's over," he said, his voice flat dead. He finally sank onto one of the plush sofas, his body deflating as if all the air had been let out of him. He looked like a king who had just been dethroned, stripped of his robes and cast out of his own castle. "It's all gone." The anger came then, hot and blinding, replacing Chloe's shock. This wasn't her fault. She had invested 5 years of her life in this man and his promises. She had endured the whispers, the secrecy, the lonely holidays. For what? To end up with nothing in a borrowed penthouse, watching her future crumble. Gone. "What do you mean, gone?" she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering completely. "You told me she was nothing, a ghost. You said you had it all under control. You promised me—" "I thought I did," he yelled back, his own desperation and fury erupting. "How was I supposed to know she was capable of this? She reads poetry, for God's sake. She volunteers at the library. She's—" "Amelia. Well, Amelia just wiped you out." Chloe's voice was sharp, accusatory. "And what about me? Where does this leave me? You said you were leaving her for me. You said I was your future." Adrian looked at her, and for the first time Chloe saw not adoration or passion in his eyes, but a cold, resentful emptiness. In his ruin, she was no longer a prize to be won, but another complication, another reminder of his spectacular failure. "The future," he scoffed, a bitter, ugly sound. "There is no future. Don't you get it? I have nothing, less than nothing. I'm going to be buried in lawsuits and debt before the week is out. The life I promised you, the life we had, it was all fueled by money I don't have anymore. It's gone." The transactional nature of their relationship was suddenly laid bare, stripped of the pretty words and expensive gifts. He had bought her time, her affection, her loyalty, and now his credit was gone. "So that's it?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "You just lose everything, and I'm supposed to just— what, disappear? What do you want from me?" "Chloe," Adrian snarled, getting to his feet. "Blood, I have nothing left to give. My company is gone. My reputation is gone. My wife, my pregnant wife, just publicly castrated me, and I have a feeling she's only just begun." The mention of the baby, the legitimate heir, was another twist of the knife for Chloe. It was the one thing she could never give him, the one thing Amelia had used to seal her victory. The fight devolved from there, a toxic explosion of blame and recrimination. All the years of unspoken resentments, of power imbalances and deceit came pouring out. Chloe accused him of being a liar and a fool. He accused her of being a gold digger who was only with him for his money. In the heart of their love nest, surrounded by the trappings of a life that no longer existed, they tore each other apart. "You knew he was married," he shouted. "You told me you were leaving her," she screamed back. The argument raged until they were both exhausted, their voices raw, their anger spent. They were left in the wreckage, two strangers who had built a fantasy on a foundation of lies. Finally, Chloe walked towards the bedroom, not with the languid sensuality of before, but with the weary steps of a defeated soldier. "I'm getting my things," she said, her voice hollow. "Where will you go?" Adrian asked, not out of concern, but with the flat curiosity of a man surveying the extent of the damage. Chloe stopped at the doorway and looked back at him. The man she had once seen as a god now looked small, pathetic, drowning in the ruins of his own making. "I don't know," she said, and for the first time a genuine, terrifying uncertainty filled her. But I know I can't stay here. This place, it's a graveyard. Meanwhile, Amelia was not at home resting. She was in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of the Vance Global building, overlooking the dark expanse of the Hudson River. The room was filled with the quiet, focused energy of people who understood power. Her legal team, headed by a sharp, silver-haired woman named Eleanor Vance, a distant but fiercely loyal cousin, was assembled. A crisis management PR team was on standby. "The filing was successful, Amelia," Eleanor said, pushing a tablet across the polished mahogany table. "The transfer is complete. The board has been officially notified of the change in majority, ownership, and control." Amelia nodded, her expression serene. She took a sip of chamomile tea. "And the Dubai Consortium." "As you instructed," a junior lawyer chimed in. "The capital call was rescinded at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Time, citing unforeseen risk and material misrepresentation by Sterling Holdings. The default clause was triggered. Our acquisitions team is preparing the paperwork to absorb the forfeited assets. By our preliminary estimates, it will give Vance Global a significant entry into the luxury real estate market at a fraction of the cost." Amelia allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. It wasn't just revenge. It was good business. Her grandfather would have been proud. "What's our next move with Adrian?" Eleanor asked, her tone pragmatic. "For now, we let him drown," Amelia said calmly. "The financial press will get wind of the insolvency by morning. The sharks will start circling. Let him flail. Let him see who his real friends are. And the divorce. File it first thing in the morning," Amelia instructed. "On grounds of adultery. We'll be generous. We won't ask for a penny from him. The optics of that are important. This isn't about taking his money. It's about taking her power back. It's about him having nothing left." Her phone buzzed. It was Mr. Jones. Subject 2. "Duval has left the penthouse with luggage. Subject 1, Sterling remains. He appears to be making a lot of frantic phone calls." Amelia typed a reply. "His calls won't be answered. See to it." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Amelia explained, "My grandfather taught me that in a war, you control the lines of communication. For the next 24 hours, anyone of consequence that Adrian tries to call his bankers, his lawyers, his board members will find their calls being mysteriously dropped or routed to a very apologetic but unhelpful junior assistant." Eleanor Vance chuckled a dry, appreciative sound. "Elias was a bastard. A brilliant bastard." "Yes, he was," Amelia agreed, a genuine warmth in her voice. She stood up and walked to the window, placing a hand on the cool glass. She looked down at the city, at the endless river of lights. It wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was her kingdom. She had not just survived, she had conquered. The fragile flower had revealed her thorns of steel. And as she looked out at her new empire, built from the ashes of her husband's betrayal, she felt not a shred of regret. She felt only the calm, steady heartbeat of her unborn child and the fierce, exhilarating promise of her own future. The dawn broke over Manhattan with a cruel, indifferent beauty. For Adrian Sterling, it was the dawn of a new, terrifying reality. The frantic, unanswered phone calls of the previous night gave way to the cold, hard print of the morning's financial news. It started with a leak, a single devastating article on the Wall Street Journal's website, posted just before the markets opened. Sterling Holdings on brink of collapse as key funding for Dubai. Mega project mysteriously evaporates. The word mysteriously was a journalistic courtesy. Within an hour, the mystery was solved as rival outlets smelling blood in the water dug deeper. The narrative quickly coalesced. The pooled funding was linked to Vance Global, and the sudden seismic shift in control at Vance Global was linked to Elias Vance's spousal infidelity clause, activated by his heiress, Amelia Vance Sterling. By 9:30 a.m., when the opening bell rang on Wall Street, Sterling Holdings' stock was in free fall. It plummeted with a velocity that was breathtaking to behold. The company he had built from the ground up, the symbol of his genius and ambition, was being eviscerated in real time on the screens of every terminal in the financial world. Adrian sat in the silent penthouse, a relic of a life he no longer lived, watching the carnage unfold on a giant television screen. He hadn't slept. He hadn't showered. A half-empty bottle of scotch sat on the marble table next to Amelia's damning documents. His phone, which had been his scepter of power, now rang incessantly with calls he couldn't bear to answer. Angry investors, panicked board members, opportunistic journalists. His lawyer, a bulldog named Marcus Thorne, finally got through. "Adrian!" "What the hell is going on?" Marcus's voice was a frantic shout. "My phone has been blowing up." "They're saying Vance Global pulled your funding, that you're in default. They're saying your wife. That Amelia. It's true." Adrian said, his voice a dead monotone. "All of it." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. How is this possible?" The Vance inheritance was supposed to be locked up tighter than Fort Knox. "She had a key," Adrian replied, the words tasting like ash, "and I was stupid enough to hand it to her." "We can fight this, Adrian," Marcus insisted, his litigator's instincts kicking in. "We can challenge the will claim, undue influence, emotional distress." "Well, on what grounds, Marcus?" Adrian laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. "That my pregnant wife was so distressed by my 5-year affair that she cleverly and legally bankrupted me. I don't think that'll play well in court. She didn't just beat me. She checkmated me. The game is over." As if on cue, there was another buzz at the elevator. This time it wasn't Amelia. It was a courier, a young man in a crisp uniform, who looked terrified to be there. He handed Adrian a thick envelope. Inside were the divorce papers, filed that morning. Clean, simple, and utterly brutal. Amelia was citing adultery and waiving any and all claims to his assets. She wanted nothing from him. It was the ultimate power move, a public declaration that he had nothing she could possibly want. Attached was a restraining order, preventing him from coming within 500 feet of her home, or any Vance Global property. He was officially an exile. He dropped the papers onto the growing pile of his life's wreckage. He was no longer just losing his company. He was losing his identity. Who was Adrian Sterling without the billions, the power, the name that opened every door? He was just a man in an expensive suit with empty pockets. For Chloe Duval, the dawn was just as grim. She had spent the night in a sterile, overpriced room at the Mandarin Oriental paid for, with the dwindling credit on a card Adrian had given her. She had left the penthouse with 2 suitcases filled with designer clothes and a future that was a complete blank. Her phone was also buzzing, but not with business calls. It was her social circle, the coterie of wives and girlfriends of the New York elite. The news was spreading like wildfire through their encrypted chat groups and hushed phone calls. But the tone was not one of sympathy. It was one of schadenfreude, of vicious, triumphant gossip. "Did you hear about Chloe Duval? The Sterling affair blew up in her face. Amelia Sterling took him to the cleaners, and the mistress serves her right." I always knew she was just a glorified call girl. Now she has nothing. Chloe scrolled through the messages, her stomach churning. These were women she had lunched with, vacationed with, shared secrets with. She had thought she was on the verge of joining their ranks, of becoming one of them. Now she was their cautionary tale, the Icarus who had flown too close to the sun and had her wings of Chanel and Cartier melted away. She had been cast out. The invitations would stop. The calls would go unanswered. The doors to the exclusive restaurants and clubs which had once swung open at the mention of Adrian's name would now be firmly shut. In the brutal social ecosystem of Manhattan, she had gone from predator to prey in the space of a single evening. Desperate, she tried to call Adrian. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. She knew then that he had cut her off just as the world was cutting him off. She was a loose end, a liability he could no longer afford. The final crushing blow came from her own family. Her mother called her voice a shrill symphony of panic and disapproval. "Chloe, what have you done? Your father and I are being humiliated. Everyone is talking, after all the sacrifices we made for you. For this is how you repay us. By getting involved with a married man and becoming a public disgrace." He was going to leave her mum, Chloe cried, the justification sounding weak and pathetic, even to her own ears. "Oh, stop it, Chloe. You thought you were so clever, but you were just a fool. You hitched your wagon to a falling star, and now you're going to drag us all down with you." Chloe hung up the silence in the hotel room, pressing in on her. Her mother's words echoed in her head. A fool. Was that what she was? She had seen her relationship with Adrian as a strategic investment. She had played the long game, banking on a future that now lay in ruins, and Amelia, the woman she had dismissed as a fragile non-entity, had been the true strategist all along. Amelia had been playing a different game. A game with higher stakes and deadlier consequences. And she had won. In the serene, light-filled living room of her Park Avenue apartment, Amelia was not gloating. She was methodically planning the next phase of her life. The news reports were just background noise. The collapse of Sterling Holdings was a mere footnote. Eleanor Vance sat opposite her, a file of resumes in her lap. "We need to appoint an interim CEO for the Sterling assets we've acquired. Someone to clean house and stabilize things." Amelia looked out the window, her gaze distant. "I have someone in mind." She picked up her phone and made a call. "Mr. Jones," she said when the private investigator answered. "How would you like a new job? I have a portfolio of distressed real estate assets that require a man with a certain attention to detail. The official title will be Head of Asset Management. The unofficial title will be My Bulldog." There was a pause on the line, then a low chuckle. "I think I'd like that very much, Mrs. Sterling." "Good," Amelia said. "Your first task is to liquidate the 157 penthouse. Immediately. I want all of his personal effects put in storage and the property sold. I never want to see it again." She hung up and looked at Eleanor. "Adrian built his empire on glitter and hype. We will rebuild it on substance and stability. Vance Global doesn't build monuments to ego. We build foundations." Her phone rang again. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. "Hello." "Amelia. It's Chloe." The voice was shaky, stripped of its former purring confidence. Amelia was surprised. She had expected never to hear from the woman again. "What do you want, Chloe?" Amelia's tone was not harsh, but it was not welcoming. I just wanted to say, you won," Chloe said, her voice cracking. "You were right. He's a liar, a user. He promised me everything, and he left me with nothing. I wanted you to know that I see that now." It was a strange, pathetic olive branch. Perhaps Chloe was looking for sympathy, or perhaps absolution. Amelia felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a kind of weary understanding. Chloe was a casualty of Adrian's war, just as She-Hulk had been. They were on opposite sides, but they had both been betrayed by the same man. "Seeing the truth doesn't change what you did, Chloe," Amelia said, her voice firm, but not unkind. "You made your choices. You gambled on a man's character, and you lost. I gambled on my own strength, and I won. That's the difference between us." She continued, "My advice to you is this: stop looking for a man to build your future. Build it yourself. You are more than just someone's mistress. Or at least you can be. Goodbye, Chloe." She ended the call, leaving Chloe on the other end, stunned into silence. It was not the conversation Chloe had expected. It was not forgiveness, but it was something more valuable, a harsh, unvarnished truth. Amelia placed her phone down and put both hands on her belly. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring flutter. This was her future. Not a company, not a fortune, but a new life, a legacy of her own making. She had walked through fire not to destroy a man, but to forge herself anew in the flames. The world would talk about the fall of Adrian Sterling, the billionaire who lost it all. But Amelia knew the real story. It wasn't about his fall. It was about her rise. 6 months later, the New York City skyline was unchanged, but the landscape of power had been irrevocably altered. The name Sterling was no longer synonymous with audacious success, but with catastrophic failure. Adrian Sterling's bankruptcy had been swift and brutal, a textbook case study that would be taught in business schools for years to come. He had lost everything: the company, the penthouse, the art collection, the respect. He was a ghost in the city he had once commanded, occasionally spotted by paparazzi, looking haggard and lost, a spectre of his former self. Amelia Vance, however, was no longer Amelia Sterling. Having legally reverted to her maiden name, she had become one of the most formidable and respected figures in the global business world. She did not rule with Adrian's flashy, aggressive style, but with her grandfather's quiet, strategic brilliance. Vance Global, now bolstered by a shrewdly managed real estate portfolio, flourished under her leadership. She was known for her calm demeanor, her sharp intellect, and her utter unflappability. The press had tried to paint her as an avenging ice queen, but the narrative failed to stick. She was simply too competent, too focused on the future to be defined by the drama of the past. Her greatest achievement, however, was not in the boardroom. It was the small, perfect child who now slept peacefully in a bassinet in her home office. Elias Vance II, named after the grandfather who had taught her to be a warrior, was the center of her universe. He was a daily, gurgling reminder of what she had fought for. Motherhood had softened her edges, but hardened her resolve. She was building an empire, not for herself, but for him. One sunny afternoon, while rocking baby Eli in her arms, Amelia looked out her Park Avenue window. Down on the street, she saw a woman exit a yellow cab. The woman was dressed in a simple, professional-looking pantsuit, her once silvery blonde hair now a more natural honeyed shade. She carried a leather briefcase and walked with a purpose that Amelia had never seen in her before. It was Chloe Duval. Amelia was not surprised. After their final strange phone call, Amelia had tasked Mr. Jones, now her fiercely loyal head of asset management, to keep a discreet, non-invasive eye on Chloe. Not out of suspicion, but out of a strange, lingering curiosity. The reports had been interesting. After a few weeks of floundering, Chloe had disappeared from the social scene entirely. She had sold her designer clothes and handbags on luxury consignment sites. She had moved out of the expensive hotel and into a small, modest apartment in Brooklyn. And then she had enrolled in a course to get her real estate license. She had started at the very bottom, working for a small independent brokerage, fetching coffee and making cold calls. She was by all accounts relentless. She worked 18-hour days, using the knowledge of the luxury market she had gleaned from her time with Adrian, not as a shortcut to glamour, but as a tool of the trade. She was no longer trying to marry a real estate mogul. She was trying to become one small commission at a time. The gossip columns that had once delighted in her downfall now occasionally mentioned her in a different light as a tenacious, up-and-coming agent who was making a name for herself through sheer grit. Amelia watched as Chloe strode down the block and disappeared into a brownstone. She felt a complex emotion, not friendship, not forgiveness, but a quiet, detached respect. Chloe had taken her advice. She was building her own future. Perhaps Amelia mused there were many kinds of fragile. There was the fragility that breaks, and there was the fragility that is merely a shell waiting to be shed so that something stronger can emerge. Her thoughts were interrupted by a call from Eleanor Vance. "Amelia, I have some news about Adrian," Eleanor said, her voice grim. "He's been trying to secure funding for a new venture. It's pathetic, really. A small-time development in Queens. He's been using his old name, trying to trade on a reputation that no longer exists." "And," Amelia asked, her voice neutral, "he's been approaching some of our lower-level investment managers. One of them flagged it. It seems he's making promises he can't keep, misrepresenting potential returns. It's dangerously close to fraud." Amelia was silent for a moment, listening to the soft breathing of her son. The old Amelia, the one consumed by the fire of betrayal, might have seen this as an opportunity to deliver the final crushing blow. To leak the information to ensure he was not only bankrupt, but possibly imprisoned. But she was not that person anymore. Her victory was complete. Pounding Adrian into the dust now would be a petty act, a waste of energy she would rather devote to her son and her company. Revenge was a fire that consumed everything, including the person who wielded it. She had her son. She had her legacy. Adrian Sterling was a footnote in her story, and it was time to turn the page. "Eleanor," Amelia said finally, her voice clear and decisive, "do nothing. Let him be. His ventures will fail or succeed on their own merit or lack thereof. He is no longer our concern. His name is not to be mentioned in this office again. We look forward, not back." "Understood," Eleanor replied, a hint of admiration in her tone. Amelia hung up the phone and looked down at her son. His eyes, the same deep brown as hers, blinked open and stared up at her. In them, she saw not the past, not the betrayal or the pain, but an infinite, unspoiled future. She had walked into that penthouse with inheritance, papers ready to burn a kingdom to the ground. And she had. But in its place, she had built something far more valuable, far more enduring. She had built a life. And it was a life that was entirely gloriously her own. The fragile wife was gone, and in her place stood a queen ruler of her own destiny, mother to a prince and the architect of a future built not on promises, but on strength, integrity, and the unbreakable power of a woman who had decided to save herself. And that, my friends, is the story of how a woman who was underestimated, betrayed, and left for broke turned the tables on the powerful man who wronged her. It's a reminder that the greatest strength often lies where we least expect it, and that a person's true worth is not in the money they have, but in the character they reveal when everything is on the line. Amelia's journey from a supposedly fragile wife to a formidable queen wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclamation. She reclaimed her name, her power, and her future, proving that the best inheritance is the strength you find within yourself. If you were on the edge of your seat listening to this story of drama, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a story of epic payback. And to make sure you don't miss our next millionaire drama, be sure to click subscribe and ring that notification bell. We have so many more stories of intrigue and karma to share with you. Thank you for listening.